The recent spree of mass shootings has brought gun rights back into the political spotlight, and One America's John Hines spoke to a legal expert about how this question of gun rights could play out in the Supreme Court.
I'm here with Carrie Severino, who is the Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network and author of Justice on Trial. We've just had these mass shootings. Tie this in a little bit of the notion of the Second Amendment. What is the court's role when something like this happens? How is Mr. Kavanaugh's, what is his view on the Second Amendment in relationship with these kind of calls for gun control?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a great example of where the judges aren't supposed to be getting in the middle of a policy debate. I think everyone left, right, and center says we want less gun violence in America, but there are different policy proposals for how to do that. Do we do that by having more limits on gun ownership? Do they do that by making sure that there actually is availability for concealed carry so that American citizens can help be there when the police doesn't have time to get there, et cetera? Those are all different ways to try to achieve the same goal. The justices are not the ones in a position to make that balancing question of how do we want to do this. Their job is to look at what does the Constitution say and simply what limits are allowed under the Constitution. Justice Kavanaugh himself actually has a very strong view of the Second Amendment in a follow-up to the Heller case that the Supreme Court decided. So certainly that's something that he's anticipated to be a strong defender on.
How does it work with the legislature if they pass a gun control measure and then going up to the Supreme Court? When do they decide to get engaged?
Well, the Supreme Court already has a Second Amendment case ready for next term, so that will be exciting to see. Under the Constitution, the Supreme Court only can consider cases and controversies, so they can't just say, oh, well, there's this really interesting law that's been passed in you name it state, and let's opine on whether it's constitutional or not. There has to actually be someone who is harmed under that law and then will sue. So there's a New York case coming up to the Supreme Court that they did decide to consider about that severely limits the ability of even people who have registered handguns in New York to travel with them and to bring them even outside of the state, so that, or the city. So when you have a serious issue like the Second Amendment limits, and there are a lot of varying ways that different appellate courts have looked at them, I think a lot of people have said the Supreme Court really does need to weigh in because it hasn't in many years weighed in to kind of give guidance to lower courts on how to interpret the Second Amendment.
When there's an event like these shootings we have, what goes through the mind of a Supreme Court justice when something like that happens, do you think?
Well, I mean, they're Americans like the rest of us. They were shocked and horrified by what happened, and it's always a tragedy. They take cases as they come to them, and they should be interpreting them according to what the law actually says. I would hope that none of the justices says, well, now I have to be on a campaign to do one thing or the other. Leave the campaigning to the politicians.
Carrie Severino, author of Justice on Trial, Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network. Thank you for joining us on One America News.
Thanks.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube. And call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.